Caitlin Clark didn't just win the rematch. She turned it into a record-breaking statement. After DiJonai Carrington publicly promised revenge and said she would personally guard Clark on August 23, the stage was set. 1 month of build-up. One highly anticipated matchup. One chance to prove the talk meant something. Instead, Clark walked out with 37 points, 10 assists, and 8 three-pointers. Carrington, 7 points. And by the fourth quarter, the talking had almost completely disappeared. But here's what makes this night so wild. Clark's performance wasn't just about revenge. It rewrote the Fever record book, added several new marks to WNBA history, helped Indiana set a franchise record, and pushed Chicago officially out of playoff contention. And the funniest part, the player who had been caught in the middle of this entire feud had been waiting quietly for the perfect moment to say one sentence. That moment finally came after the game. Let's go back to where this all started. The hit that started everything. August 8th. Sophie Cunningham was going up for a play when Carrington came across and caught her with an elbow across the head. The officials reviewed it. Then came the decision. Flagrant 2. Carrington was ejected. But the hit itself wasn't what kept the controversy alive. It was what happened afterward. Cunningham was left dealing with a stiff neck the next morning, while Carrington didn't exactly show much remorse. Instead, she posted a message from the locker room that immediately exploded online. 2 words. White privilege. She tagged the Fever. Then came another post. August 23rd. That was the date she had apparently circled for revenge. Suddenly, this wasn't just another regular season game. The matchup had a storyline. Fans had a date. And Carrington had made a promise she would eventually have to keep. She told reporters she would guard Clark herself. Cunningham, meanwhile, didn't answer with another social media post. She simply said Carrington couldn't guard Clark. No dramatic speech. No online battle. Just confidence. And 2 weeks later, the court would decide who was right. Chicago had the perfect opportunity. On paper, Chicago actually had reasons to feel good. The Sky entered the game riding a 3-game winning streak. Indiana had lost 2 straight. And the Fever were playing the second night of a back-to-back without Aaliyah Boston. Chicago needed the win for its playoff hopes. For one half, it looked like the Sky might get exactly what they wanted. At halftime, Chicago led 51-50. 1 point. Everything was still up for grabs. But there was one problem. Carrington had spent weeks creating expectations for this exact moment. Now she had to guard Caitlin Clark in front of the entire basketball world. And from the opening tip, the intensity was obvious. There was contact. There was trash talk. There were bumps away from the ball. Carrington seemed determined to make Clark uncomfortable. But Clark didn't respond the way Chicago wanted. She responded with shots. The problem with guarding the old Caitlin Clark. Carrington's defensive strategy seemed built around a version of Clark that no longer exists. She went under screens. She gave Clark space. She tried to disrupt her rhythm physically. But Clark didn't hesitate. Every time Carrington went under a screen, Clark was ready to shoot. And when the shot went up, splash. Again. And again. And again. Most of Clark's 8 threes came with Carrington directly involved in the matchup. That wasn't just a bad defensive night. It was a complete reversal of the storyline. Carrington had promised to stop Clark. Instead, she became part of the highlight reel. At one point, Carrington argued with officials after a foul call. Moments later, Clark stepped back and drilled a 3 directly over her. No argument. No reaction. Just 3 points. Then came another physical exchange. Carrington shoved Clark after a play. Clark barely acknowledged it. She simply waved her off and went back down the court. That reaction may have been more damaging than any trash talk. Because Clark wasn't interested in the fight. She was interested in winning. And as the game continued, Indiana realized something important. Carrington was becoming frustrated. So they attacked the matchup. Again. And again. And again. While one player was chasing the revenge narrative, Clark was quietly building one of the best statistical performances of her career. And that's where the record book comes in. Record after record after record. Clark finished with 37 points, 10 assists, and 8 threes. Those numbers alone would make the night memorable. But Clark didn't stop there. She added several historic accomplishments. First, Clark became the first player in WNBA history to record multiple games of 35+ points and 10+ assists in a single season. And this was her second such game of the year. Then came another incredible milestone. It was Clark's 5th career game with at least 30 points and 10 assists. Before her, the entire history of the WNBA had produced only 4 such games. Clark now had 5 herself. Think about that. An entire league's history had 4. Clark, barely into her career, had 5. Then there was another record involving halves. Clark recorded her 8th half this season with at least 15 points and 5 assists, the most in a single WNBA season. And there's a twist. The previous record belonged to Clark too. She had set it during her rookie season. Now she's broken her own mark. Then came the shooting records. Clark's 8 three-pointers were a new career high. And those 8 threes helped her become the fastest player in WNBA history to reach 250 career three-pointers. She did it in just 88 games. That's not a gradual climb. That's a sprint. She also moved into second place for the most double-doubles by a guard in WNBA history. And perhaps the most fitting accomplishment came last. Clark joined an extremely exclusive club of players with at least 750 points and 250 assists in a season. The only other player to ever do it. Caitlin Clark in 2024. Nobody else. So when Clark breaks records, the strangest part isn't always that she's passing other players. Sometimes, she's chasing herself. But Clark wasn't alone. While Clark was putting on a show, Kelsey Mitchell was quietly destroying Chicago too. At halftime, Mitchell had just 7 points. Then the third quarter happened. 14 points. In one quarter. She finished with 30 points, 6 three-pointers, 4 assists, 2 rebounds, 2 steals, and a block. And those 30 points extended Mitchell's incredible streak to 23 consecutive games with at least 20 points. That's a WNBA record. And she's still extending it. The bigger story is what Mitchell means for Clark. Defenses can't simply focus on Clark anymore. Because if they do, Mitchell gets open. And when Mitchell gets hot, the game changes instantly. That combination produced another historic milestone. Clark and Mitchell now have the most 30-point games by a duo in WNBA history. This was their third together this season. Combined, they scored 67 points on 43 shots. And they hit 14 of Indiana's 18 three-pointers. Clark had 8. Mitchell had 6. Chicago wasn't dealing with one unstoppable shooter. They were dealing with 2. Indiana's bench refused to let up. And then there were the players filling in for Boston. Lexi Hall scored 14 points, shooting 6 of 8 from the field and 2 of 3 from deep. Michaela Timson added 12 points and 9 rebounds, while also making a key defensive play with a block on Camila Cardoso. Mercedes Russell stepped into a larger role too, helping move the ball and providing size after Boston's absence. That's what made Indiana's performance so dangerous. It wasn't just Clark. It wasn't just Mitchell. The entire team kept finding ways to contribute. And Chicago was running out of answers. Then the fourth quarter happened. At halftime, Chicago led by 1. 12 minutes later, the game was over. Indiana exploded in the fourth quarter. The Fever outscored Chicago 30-13. A 1-point deficit became a 113-90 victory. A 23-point blowout. And Indiana didn't just win. They broke another franchise record. The Fever made 18 three-pointers, the most in franchise history. They attempted 33. And they made them at a staggering 54.5%. Clark and Mitchell accounted for 14 of those 18 makes by themselves. That's the kind of shooting night that can completely break a defense. Chicago simply couldn't keep up. And for the Sky, the consequences were even bigger. Chicago's season was over. The loss, combined with a Washington victory, officially eliminated Chicago from playoff contention. The Sky could keep playing games. But their postseason hopes were finished. Indiana, meanwhile, kept climbing. The Fever reached 25 wins, giving the 2026 team the most wins in franchise history. And remember, they did it without Boston. That's an important detail. Because Indiana wasn't simply surviving injuries. It was finding ways to win without one of its most important players. Which brings us back to the player who started this whole storyline. DiJonai Carrington. The revenge game that wasn't. Carrington had circled August 23rd. She had promised revenge. She had promised to guard Clark. She had spent weeks creating anticipation. So what happened? 7 points. 3-4-11 shooting. 0-4-3 from 3. 3 rebounds. 1 assist. 1 block. And a -5 in 18 minutes. That's the final chapter of the revenge tour. Once Indiana pulled away, the energy changed. The mocking stopped. The constant jawing disappeared. The game became about trying to keep up. And Clark? She just kept playing. No retaliation. No dramatic confrontation. No need to prove anything verbally. The scoreboard was already doing it. Then Sophie Cunningham delivered the punchline. Remember Sophie Cunningham? The player who was hit. The player who didn't spend 2 weeks fighting online. The player who simply waited. After the game, Cunningham finally had her moment. And her line was brutally simple. She joked that even Carrington's long nails couldn't stop Caitlin. That's it. 1 sentence. But after everything that happened, it landed perfectly. Because Cunningham didn't need to win the argument online. She didn't need to post a countdown. She didn't need to promise revenge. She let the game answer for her. Clark had 8 threes. Carrington had 0. Indiana won by 23. And the player who promised to shut Clark down ended the night with 7 points. The real lesson. This wasn't just a rivalry game. It was a reminder of what happens when the story becomes bigger than the basketball. Carrington created the expectation. Clark delivered the performance. Mitchell added another 30-point explosion. Indiana broke the franchise 3-point record. The Fever set a new franchise mark for wins. Chicago was eliminated. And Clark added another collection of historic numbers to a career that is barely getting started. The biggest takeaway might be the simplest one. Talk creates expectations. Performance creates answers. For weeks, August 23rd was supposed to be Carrington's night. Instead, it became Caitlin Clark's. And perhaps that's what makes the ending so satisfying. Clark didn't need to say much. She didn't need to celebrate every confrontation. She didn't need to answer every shove. She just kept shooting. 8 threes later, the revenge story had completely changed. Indiana walked away with a franchise record. Chicago walked away eliminated. Clark walked away with another piece of WNBA history. And Carrington, the player who promised everyone would remember August 23rd, made sure they did. Just not for the reason she expected. So what do you think? Was this Caitlin Clark's most satisfying performance of the season? And is the Clark-Mitchell backcoat now the most dangerous scoring duo in the WNBA? Drop your take in the comments. And if you enjoyed the breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because if this game was any indication, the Fever's story is only getting started.